how much discussion there is about chairs in our election code and whether we should create a requirement or not. I'm here to tell you that under the ADA, all these poll sites in county supervisors' offices are Title II actors, which there's a requirement to provide reasonable accommodations upon request, including the chair. So one of the things that I'm constantly talking about is the need to not make this a system of magic words where people who are trying to exercise their right to vote understand that I am someone with a qualified disability, and this is a request under Title II of the ADA for a reasonable accommodation. You would hope that there's a lot more plain language ability to all of this. So that's in-person voting in a normal year. This isn't a normal year. We had a whole bunch of plans in place way back in February to do a whole bunch of in-person outreach and education as a part of Access the Vote Florida. We had to kind of shelve a whole bunch of that plans and adjust all the rest of the planning. And one of the first things we encountered is, because again, you'll hear, luckily we live in Florida. Well, let me restate that. We live in Florida, and luckily, this is a no excuse vote by mail balloting state, unlike many other states in our union where you have to advance an excuse to be able to even request to vote by mail or absentee. Florida thankfully isn't like that, which I would say is a good thing. However, as much as there was a tendency back in March to think of, all right, well, so if it's dangerous or unsafe to vote in person, and it might be even more so in 3 weeks, who knows? I want you to know that as much as the natural tendency is to think that vote by mail balloting is the answer to everything, it really isn't. If you think about it, if you have a visual impairment or a print impairment, and when we talk about print impairments, of course, we're talking about things like dyslexia. We're talking about things like certain learning disabilities that are impacted by the ability to read information on a page the way that it's presented to you. We're also talking about not having limbs or not having use of your limbs to be able to vote on a written page. So for a whole swath of folks in the state, vote by mail balloting isn't accessible. I'm an attorney. You might not know, because unlike Margaret, I have jack-o'-lanterns and bats behind me rather than law degrees or other degrees. But in our election code is a requirement for vote by mail balloting to be accessible. It was put in the books in 2002, right on the heels of the Help America Vote Act, which for folks who are that old was the Hanging Chad fiasco of 2000. And the requirements of HAVA, which is the Help America Vote Act, again, it's kind of, there's two touchstones here. One is the ability to cast a vote privately and the ability to cast a vote independently. And for folks with visual impairments or who are print impaired, receiving a piece of paper in the mail and being able to vote the ballot you want privately and without asking for help, or, hey, there's a lot of folks who that's not a problem, right? We trust our partners, we trust our children, our parents to give us good information, but that's not how voting should work. We have a system where secret balloting is the centerpiece of our elections process. And so for those folks, just getting a piece of paper doesn't suffice. And so much like many other states in America at the moment, this was an issue that was moved into the courts for consideration. And I won't bore you with how that all went, but I will bore you with the fact that the state of Florida signed a settlement agreement with all 67 counties. And beginning on November 3rd, actually beginning right now, there are 5 pilot counties who are now offering accessible vote by mail balloting. And in March of 22, all 67 counties will offer this. And what this is, real quick, is this is the ability to request an electronic ballot, have that ballot sent to you, complete the ballot using your own assistive technology, screen readers, JAWS, whatever assistive technology you need to use, and then printing that ballot out and sending it through the mail or at a Dropbox, just like a normal vote by mail ballot. I also won't go into bore you why even that process I just described isn't truly accessible. Only 10% of all of us own printers, if you can imagine. And so the expectation that someone with a disability also has a printer, also has the transportation ability to get to the poll to drop off the ballot, those are far reaches and things we need to continue looking at. But just real quick, so this is something to be aware of. Those pilot counties are Miami-Dade, down in Debbie's neck of the woods, Orange, Pinellas, Nassau and Volusia. So those are the 5. And like I said, in two marches from now, every county will have this new process. even that isn't the end of the puzzle, y'all, because as we're seeing, even in these 5 pilot counties, there's a whole bunch of concerns about how are we alerting folks with disabilities to this new reality. And even if we are alerting as best as we're able, is that alerting accessible itself? You know, the accessibility of information is a whole nother contour to this that we have to keep preeminent as we're having these discussions. That's information in the final 2 weeks before the election that we want to make sure is accessible by people. That's information in just about every regard. And if we're not making that information accessible, then we're kind of, the inference could be left open that, hey, this isn't for you, or these processes aren't for you. Here's the thing, I have about 5 minutes to talk and I've already used it up. I'll just real quick laundry list. Other things to think about are signature mismatch. I actually just heard on MSNBC, they were talking about signature mismatch and how folks who've had strokes might have a different signature than they did 2 years ago. That's true. I work with people with disabilities that affect their signatures year after year. So signature mismatch and rejection issues are keenly felt in disability voting circles, something to be aware of. Just so everyone knows that these aren't just, you know, disabilities focused, like in and of itself. Another thing we're looking at is facility voting. So in our election code is a provision for supervised facility voting. The way that works in ALFs and nursing homes, which hard pause here, that's only 2 congregate settings. That does not include group homes. That does not include ICFs or other institutional settings where folks with disabilities might and very likely do still have the right to vote and should be assisted in this. But in ALFs and nursing homes, if there's 5 folks who want to vote in a supervised capacity, meaning that their county election officials show up at their facility and administer the ballots to them, there's a process for requesting that. We've heard anecdotally that some counties are not offering that. We've heard that some counties are actually putting out information saying, don't even request, we're not going to do it, which is strange to me because every time I read the newspaper, we're in stage 9 of reopening across the statewide, one where there's a difference here or whatever. So that's something we're looking at. We're actually doing a whole bunch of get out the vote efforts that are aimed towards folks in ALFs and nursing homes to try to make sure that they're getting good information. They know where to look for information. You know, so I'll stop after this. Here's kind of the thing, right? So, you know, doing that, reaching out into senior populations, it necessarily means we might be upping the vote on one side of the election or the other. Those are immaterial considerations for us. I want you to know that if you're a voting rights participant, then it's those rights that are sacred. And it doesn't matter how those rights inure one way or the other way. I have a beard. I'm sure some folks can, you know, infer that my political leanings might be different than folks in an ALF or a nursing home. And that's okay. Because when you're doing this work, it's important to make sure you're creating that access to the ballot. That's what Access to Vote Florida is about. I'm sorry I took about 8 minutes. I'm going to kick it to Debbie. And thanks for the conversation, y'all.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to try to keep myself and finish by 2:25 so we stay on your schedule. As you can tell, and you'll hear from me, we are extremely passionate about voting and what we do. Tony, Jay, and I, we could speak about this all day and still not tell you everything in our brains that we want to share with you. I'm going to try to wrap it all up and bring it back to our coalition. What I love about our coalition is it's not just organizations like Tony's and mine, but it's filled with people like Jay that are self-advocates from all over the state with all different disabilities. And we're all working together with one common purpose and one common goal, which is to allow everybody the right to vote for whoever they want to in whatever format that they feel is comfortable for them. And what's so exciting is our work doesn't stop on November 3rd. We have plans to keep going, just like we did when the elections in 2018 stopped. We'll continue and grow. And we want to share what we do with everyone so that we can invite everyone to join us. And I'm going to end with some statistics. There was a study that just came out of Rutgers University that says it's projected that there's 38.3 million people with disabilities that are eligible to vote in the November 2020 election. That we've now created a disability voting block. And what's amazing about this number is that if you take the idea of putting a stone in a pond and it rippling out, when you take the people with disability as the center and start going out in concentric circles to family members, to friends, to caregivers and medical professionals that work with people with disabilities, That number goes to 67.7 million eligible voters. Can you imagine with how close our elections are, especially in our state, what that number of votes could do? And a lot of the people with disabilities, they're not voting, so they're not in any of the numbers or percentages that we're working with. These would be new voters adding to the votes that we're getting. The power of that is unbelievable. And that is somewhat of the motivation of Access to Vote Florida and what we're doing. We want to capture every one of those potential voters and bring them into the voting pool and our elections. So I'm going to stop there so that we're respectful of your time and let you ask us questions or move to the next part. So thank you, Carrie.
Sure. Do we have any questions for Deborah, Jason, and Tony? Merrick, you have a question?
Yeah, this is gonna sound pretty typical. I guess the question that comes to my mind is, what spurred all this on?
Do you mean of why we got involved in it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we all came into it for different reasons. My organization is a disability rights organization, and voting, we feel, is one of the fundamental rights that a person with a disability should and needs to be able to do. And we've worked actually on litigation in your county with those hanging chads many years ago. We were involved in voting disability litigation, and it has always been one of the core beliefs that we have, that a person with a disability should have the right to vote. And I can let Tony and Jay give you their reason, but that's my reason why I got involved.
This is Jay again, for anybody who can't see me or anything. I don't know if my video's cutting out or whatnot, but to answer your question, I got involved because I find that to be a person with a disability is one thing, but it's my goals to make a difference, and I was looking for another way to increase my advocacy. And like Debbie said, I believe that voting is a right for everyone, no matter your ability. To use a disability rights slogan, nothing about us without us is something I try and live by. Like Debbie said, we make up such a large portion of the population that it was my goal to increase the political power of people with disabilities. That's why I got involved.
Tony, did you want to also?
Gary, I apologize. I missed the question. I had to run and answer this phone that's ringing in my living room.
Oh, sorry.
Just running around at the moment. Sorry.
Merrick, you want to repeat your question for Tony?
Sure. What was your reason for being a part of the origin of this project?
So, well, the simple answer, the one that my supervisor would want me to tell you, is because it's one of the 9 federal grants that Disability Rights Florida receives from the federal government to do voting access work. That's not the whole story, though. Like Jay was saying, back in 2018, we were kind of wondering where this organization and coordination is happening. That's tough. It's always tough to be contacted by a self-advocate or partners in our network, and to the only thing back as a response is like, well, I don't know. I don't know if we have a chapter that's been formalized. I don't know if this conversation is happening in the state. But you know, as much as that's deflating to have to respond, and I remember sending Jay that email where I was like, I'm not sure. It's double, as deflating as that is, it's double empowering to be able to see how much progress and how much organizing can occur in 2 years. And to be in forums like this, where I believe Carrie invited Margaret just to talk about legislative stuff. Margaret's part of our crew too. I'm part of Margaret's crew. I mean, what Jay was saying, nothing about us without us, that's the core of everything. That's the core of disability advocacy in general. And so it's always nice to be able to do it on a unified front with the benefit of the perspective of people with disabilities, as well as the benefit of others in our network. It's not always easy for Margaret's group or my group or Debbie's group to put our letterheads on things, to, you know, a lot of times that's where people get anxiety ridden, like, well, I don't want to, you know, rattle the cage this way or that way. But you know what, even though that's the case, it's always nice to know that we can parse through those kind of realities and present this united front and share information like we're doing right now and have these discussions, because I promise this is the only Zoom call happening right now where people are talking about this. Only the 24 of us right now. And if we're not talking about it, then who is? And if they're not talking about it, well, then how will 2022 or 2024 be any different?
Great, Tony. And I saw, Deborah, you put some links in the chat for us to look into.
I did, because the next step is once you start voting, your voting has power, and then we'll be able to hold our candidates accountable. Well, what are your views on certain issues that are important to us, and how are you going to vote if I elect you? And so the questions that we have made in this candidate questionnaire talk about issues that, as our coalition decided, were important to people with disabilities in our state. So that becomes the next step. Once you show you vote and your vote has power, we can use that power.
Great.
Carrie, I would be so remiss if I didn't, just as maybe a final plug for our portion, just mention that we have our calls on Friday at 11 a.m. We've been meeting every single week since March because of COVID and trying to figure this all out together. After the election, that might roll back into every 2 weeks or once a month, but we have so much in line for 2021 that's exciting. We have received some grant funding to be able to work as a part of our coalition. We're going to create a grant operations committee to figure out how to, you know, do we use this money to do direct mailing? Do we use this money to get out the vote? How does this coalition grow? So there's so much on the horizon, and you all are always invited. And people you know and in your networks are always invited. I'll try my best to give a little rundown in the chat of like when we meet and how we meet, but just know that, including our email address, just know that, just get in touch with us, and we would love to have others from this call and folks you're in touch with join us too. So
Awesome. And you guys are always welcome to Special Needs Advisory Coalition for Palm Beach County. Thank you so much.